Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the Fast Track Forum. My name is Cameron, and tonight we are going to be discussing the 2025 Daytona 500. We'll be going over some of our top finishers. We're going to be talking about some big pieces coming from this race and overall our thoughts and opinions of this race. So stay tuned, buckle up, it's going to be a good one. Starting things off here, we're going to be taking a look at our top 5 finishers. We have William Byron winning his second Daytona 500 in a row, followed second place by Tyler Reddick. Jimmie Johnson, 7-time champion, 2-time Daytona 500 champion, coming in third. Chase Briscoe in fourth, and in fifth place, John Hunter Nemechek. Starting things off with John Hunter Nemechek, a bit of a surprising finish, getting a top 5, given that his average running position during the race was 20th, spending less than half of the race in the top 15 overall. Was involved early in a couple accidents, but only received minor damage. Most notably was possibly one of the causes for the wreck that ended up taking out Martin Truex Jr. and Helio Castroneves, to name just a couple drivers out of that wreck happening in, I believe, what was the second stage of the race. John Hunter Nemechek, not known as being a great plate racer, so somebody who I think definitely benefited from the late race chaos, starting at around 15 to go. Seemed to be hanging out in the back of the pack for a majority of the race, by design, possibly. If so, it paid off, giving him a top 5 finish in the Daytona 500. Otherwise, not a major factor. Good points day overall. Kept his car pretty clean. Overall, not a significant storyline to this 500. Then in fourth place, we had Chase Briscoe, who had a pretty good speed week. He won the pole. First Daytona 500. I was going to say first race with Joe Gibbs Racing, but they did have the clash a couple weeks ago. So he has some experience now with his team. But for the first points-paying race, Chase Briscoe and new team at Joe Gibbs Racing, winning the pole. A big, big statement for him and for Toyota, who won their first Daytona 500 pole since joining the sport. Overall, though, Chase Briscoe had a relatively quiet Daytona 500 with an average running position of 17th and spending just shy of 50% of the race within the top 15. Overall, did not play a major factor in the finish of this race. He was right in the middle of that last lap melee between Cole Custer, Denny Hamlin, himself, Chase Briscoe, and others. However, definitely was not the major factor of that accident. Was able to escape it relatively clean and scoot his way to the finish line to come away with a 4th place finish. He was in position to capitalize. However, because of that accident leading into turn 3, it jeopardized his ability to pull off a spectacular finish of making that late race charge, escaping through the chaos of the couple wrecks that we had, and thus thwarting his efforts in order to get the Daytona 500 championship. Winning the pole and the 500, a difficult feat to do. Chase Briscoe comes home in 4th place. In 3rd place, probably the biggest surprise of the weekend, was Jimmie Johnson. 7-time champion, 2-time Daytona 500 champion, and now majority owner of Legacy Motor Club. He rode around in the back for a lot of the race, gained track position late, only to lose it again in that 3rd stage around the final pit stop. And he, because of his strategy of keeping the car clean, riding around in the back, was able to avoid the late race carnage. Jimmie had an average running position of 28th in this race, the worst average running position of our top 5 finishers, spending a measly 20.4% of the race in the top 15. Jimmy was not a factor in this race for a lot of the race. Very much played the I'm going to hang in the back, I'm going to protect my stuff, see what happens in the end, and just be there at the end. You know what they say? In order to finish first you must finish. And that was definitely the strategy for Jimmy Johnson and team in today's race. Racing with a great paint scheme, by the way. That Shaq-inspired paint scheme. Very, very cool. Speaking of basketball stars, the Michael Jordan-owned 2311 car of Tyler Reddick coming home in second place. Again, not much was said about Tyler all race. Was just kind of quiet, was kind of there in the front pack, sort of. He avoided the wrecks when needed, right place, right time at the end, was right behind William Byron as they made their way through that turn 3 accident late in the race on that last lap of the green-white checkered. Tyler Reddick had an average running position of 14th and spent 72.1% of the race in the top 15, so definitely was involved, but never felt to be a threat to lead the race, to take control of the race, and really be there when it mattered. And I guess you could say that's kind of how he won Talladega last year as well. I can't recall Tyler being very involved in that race until being there at the right time at the last lap or so of the Talladega Spring Race in order to capitalize on the mistakes by other drivers, making aggressive blocks. And Tyler just scooted his way on through and got that win at Talladega. Almost happened again last night to win his first Daytona 500. However, he's going to have to wait another year for that opportunity. And finally, that brings us to William Byron. Willie B, 2-time Daytona 500 champion, back-to-back. One of 5 drivers to do so in the history of NASCAR. We now have Byron, Hamlin, Sterling Marlin, Cale Yarborough, and Richard Petty as the 5 drivers to win back-to-back Daytona 500s in their career. A very who's who in NASCAR lore. Overall, William Byron kept his car clean. He ran in the front pack most of the race with an average running position of 11 and spending 74.1% in the top 15. He was there up front. It was very noticeable. He kept his name in the conversation throughout the entire race. He avoided 3 wrecks in order to win. I recall he was towards the back of the pack for those first 2 big wrecks, the wreck that included Joey Logano and Ricky Stenhouse with about 15 to go. Him and others, including Chase Elliott, Bubba Wallace, who scooted themselves up to the high line to try and get that third lane moving late, only to be hitting a parachute and dropping all the way back to the back of the pack. This did allow him that opportunity to keep the car clean, avoid those wrecks, and then pick his way back up to the front, because clearly he did have a strong enough car in order to do so. This kind of brings up the question, though, for William Byron. Now he's a 2-time Daytona 500 champion. He's also won the summer Daytona race. He has won a race at Atlanta. He's clearly cementing himself as one of the most successful plate racers of this current crop of drivers, having won now 3 next-gen restrictor plate races. He was also the most successful super speedway driver in 2024, accumulating the most amount of points over the course of the season. So, William Byron's second Daytona 500 win. Was this skill? Was this luck? I think this definitely was a play of both. Did William Byron want to be in 7th place coming to the white flag? Absolutely not. That is certainly not the plan going into this race, but it might as well be now, because these drivers cannot seem to not wreck. They don't have any kind of survival instincts going into these finishes. Denny Hamlin spoke on his podcast, Actions Detrimental, about living to see another corner, living to see the next straightaway. He was very upset with the way that Cole Custer finished that race, being that he was overly aggressive, making hard pushes, cutting down into lanes where there was obviously cars in, and just with the reasoning of, oh, well, I was going for it. These drivers just seem to see red when it comes to the end of these races and think that they need to get everything that they possibly can in that moment. But I look back to the 2020 Daytona 500 and the way that Denny Hamlin was able to masterfully see the run coming between Blaney and Ryan Newman, let them go, only to be able to catch the draft and get a push from Chris Buescher, and make another run at it, coming through 4 and onto the front straightaway, and ultimately winning his third Daytona 500. He explained that that move was a move thought of in the idea of being there for another opportunity. Could he have come down and blocked that move by Ryan Newman and Blaney? Absolutely, he could have. But that ultimately would have ended both Newman and Hamlin's races, and most likely Blaney's as well in that moment. However, with his forward thinking, he knew there was going to be more opportunities for him to be able to grab that lead back. Now, I'll put an asterisk on that thought, because that was with the previous car. Now, with this next-gen car, these cars do not seem to get runs on their own as well as the previous car. This car has a very large amount of drag to it. Anytime that a solo car steps out of line, it's like they hit a brick wall and they just drop all the way to the back. These cars need numbers around them in order to make the speed necessary to make the moves. So these drivers are a little handcuffed now. And I don't know what they need to do. But as it is right now, this Daytona 500 is being questioned. People are asking, is the Daytona 500 champion legitimate? I wouldn't go as far and say that William Byron is an illegitimate Daytona 500 champion. Winning 2 of these races is incredibly difficult. Winning back-to-back is even more difficult. William Byron has proved himself time and time again, especially in this next-gen era, that he is a very successful super speedway racer. Ultimately, I think this Daytona 500 win was a little bit more luck. He got shuffled out of the pack late in the race, was able to avoid the carnage. Thanks to that, that certainly wasn't his plan. His plan was definitely not to get up into that third lane to only drop to the back. That plan was to move to the front, get back into control of the race. Didn't pan out that way. And maybe that was for the better. I think it was. Or else we probably wouldn't be talking about William Byron as a Daytona 500 champion in 2025. So I look at this as a little bit more of a luck situation. I think you could kind of sense that in his interview on the front straightaway. He seemed a little subdued compared to somebody who just won the Daytona 500. Maybe the second time through, there's a little less of that excitement, but still, it's the Daytona 500. You just won the biggest race in NASCAR. And he gets out and speaks a very normal interview. Does not sound all that excited or overjoyed with emotions. Very kind of classic post-race interview. And I wonder if that was because he felt the way that ended was not quite what he would have wanted for himself anyways. It doesn't matter. His name is in the record books now as a 2-time Daytona 500 champion, back-to-back, joining Denny Hamlin, Sterling Marlin, Cale Yarborough, and Richard Petty as the only drivers to do so. So pretty big accolades there. Now, some other notes here. Team Penske, another Daytona 500 dominated with nothing to show for it. You had Austin Cindric, who statistically was in control of this race for the majority of the race. He had an average running position of 6, best in the field. He was in the top 15 for 88.6% of this race. He was up there the entire time. He could push cars well. He could take pushes well. He could lead lines. He, quite frankly, was the most dominant car of the day. You can make a case for Joey Logano being the most dominant car of the day. However, we only really saw him for the first half or so of this race. He ran into some mechanical issues as a piece of debris entered through the air ducts and entered into the throttle body, creating kind of a misfiring mishap for the car. His crew was on top of it and were able to diagnose that issue on the second time through, change a throttle body in under 80 seconds, which is wildly impressive, and get back on track, catch a timely caution, and get back onto the lead lap. And it wasn't until that wreck with Ricky Stenhouse Jr. with about 15 to go where the race became truly unraveled for him. But if that doesn't happen, we're now talking about Joey Logano back into the top 5 with 15 laps to go, with other teammates up there, Ryan Blaney, Austin Cindric up there. We could be talking about all three Penske cars racing for the Daytona 500 win. They were dominant. Blaney still missing that Daytona 500 championship, despite also statistically, or more so maybe passes the eye test, as one of the better super speedway racers of this generation currently. Average running position of 9th, 73.1% of the race in the top 15. Certainly was a player in tonight's race as well. But still looking for that magic. The magic that he's had in the summer race. The magic that he's had at Talladega. Just seems to be eluding him for the Daytona 500. That's how it goes. That's how it goes with these races. The Daytona 500 is not a kind race to some of the biggest names in NASCAR. Obviously, Dale Earnhardt. Took him 20 years. Many, many heartbreaks. Tony Stewart never won it. Mark Barton never won it. Rusty Wallace has never won it. Some really big names have never won this race. Kyle Busch and Brad Keselowski also never won, and still their drought continues. Kyle Busch was in the top 5 when that accident happened between Joey Logano and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Innocent bystander gets taken out in some other drivers' aggressive moves. Keselowski was never really a factor in tonight's race. I'm not quite sure why his race was as poor as it was. Average running position of 21st. Spent 22.5% of the race in the top 15. So was truly never a factor. He showed up late in the first stage. But other than that, he was kind of just a nobody during this race. So not a great showing for that 6 car and team. But as far as I know, both of these drivers will be back again next year, despite Father Time catching up to them. They don't have much longer, so are we going to see another Tony Stewart situation? Drivers with championships, with multiple crown jewel race wins, but the one that's eluded them for their whole career is the Daytona 500? We're going to have to wait and see till next year's race. And some final opinions. Overall, this is just how super speedway racing goes nowadays. Fuel saving for a majority of the stages till the drivers hit their number and they get loose by their crew chiefs. The 3 wide looks incredible on TV. It looks incredible in the stands. I've been fortunate enough to be at Daytona a few times during the summer race and get to see that spectacle. And it is really, really impressive. I mean, the normal person would not be able to handle themselves in a 3 wide pack like that, going 185 miles an hour. Let's be real. It is far more difficult than what these drivers make it look to be. However, to the well-educated fan, they understand that these drivers are only racing at about 60 to 75% effort. They're not going all out. They're kind of just cruising. So, I don't know if NASCAR needs to make a change for this. This is just what this current generation of super speedway racing looks like. It's not the tandems of kind of the early 2010s. It's not the rough and bumpy Daytona that we saw in the, first 10 years of the 2000s, where handling was far more important and you saw these packs get strung out. It's not that anymore. These cars just need to stick together in order to make speed. There's no separation. They all kind of end up going the same speed. So as a fan, it's a little frustrating because you want to be able to see your driver make a difference. I used the Denny Hamlin example again, and Denny Hamlin showed up late in tonight's race, kind of showing some of that super speedway racing expertise that he has. But it is still incredibly difficult for these drivers to stand out. The only way that they can make time and make up positions is by shoving the car in front of them as hard as they can. And these cars, according to the drivers, they're unstable. They just can't take those pushes over and over and over again. So it's exciting for the fans. Maybe, yes, it's dramatic. It's, it's incredible to see what these drivers are capable of doing. But at the same time, there's just always seems to be this chaos at the end with, they get to about 20 to 30 laps to go and all hell breaks loose. So for being some of the best stock car drivers in the world, it is very frustrating seeing them end up wrecking half of the field. 20 some odd cars get absolutely torn up. I think I heard only 6 drivers out of this entire field were recorded to not be in an accident. And there was really about only 4 accidents to note truly from tonight. So only 6 drivers out of the 41 who started were not involved in some kind of accident. I don't know. Maybe I have rose-colored glasses and I miss the mid-2000s or so with the Dale Earnhardt Jr. win, the Jeff Gordon win. I think of the 2007 finish as well between Kevin Harvick and Mark Martin. I just don't feel like we're going to be getting those kind of finishes anymore. We're not going to be getting some of those storybook finishes. I mean, storybook is, I guess, however you may want to define it. Harrison Burton winning the summer race last year here at Daytona to get himself into the playoffs. That's certainly storybook, but you're also taking the driver and team who are in the 30s in points as a full-time team. And they're the ones who are coming away with with these important wins, I mean, we're getting into that avenue of calling some of these races crapshoots. I think you can make a fair argument that the best super speedway racers oftentimes are not the ones finishing high up in these running orders. You have some exceptions, obviously William Byron, as mentioned before, but it's just kind of, it feels just more so of entertainment. It's entertaining. It's stressful as a fan. It's stressful to see these guys and to know that at any moment you could have these huge wrecks. I mean, Christopher Bell taking a hard hit, and poor Ryan Preece. I mean, what does a guy have to do to keep his car on the ground? Goodness gracious, poor Ryan Preece. I mean, that is now 2 times that he's gone flipping over at Daytona. Both spectacular in their own rights. This one that happened tonight was certainly unique. Seeing a car kind of blow over with the front of the car up in the air versus the side or the rear. So very unique. It's something that I don't know if that's necessarily something that NASCAR can prevent. It was an awkward hit between the other cars, sending his front end up into the air, catching the wind, and blowing over. So, again, it's spectacular, and thank goodness these cars are as safe as they are, and I never want people to be numb to the fact that what these guys are doing is very dangerous. We don't want any of these drivers getting hurt. It was heartbreaking to see Kurt Busch get cut down in 2022 after taking that rear end impact at Pocono to give him a concussion that ultimately led to the end of his career. Now, NASCAR has made changes to this car and have made it safer for the drivers. Ultimately, we're seeing a lot less head injuries in this car. Thank goodness for that. And these cars are still holding up very well during some of these really spectacular wrecks. But it's still, it's stressful. You feel for these drivers. You feel for these drivers and their families that every time they step into these cars at these super speedway races, chances are higher for them to be in an accident than they are for them to cross the finish line with a clean car. I mean, is that really racing at that point? I don't know. We'll see if NASCAR makes any adjustments. They certainly are not going to make any adjustments to these cars prior to this next week's race in Atlanta Motor Speedway. Now, Atlanta's been putting on some great races. It's acting kind of like the old Daytona is, where handling really matters. Drivers are actually having to drive their cars. It's a little bit more of that chess match. So I am looking forward to this race coming up next weekend, and I hope that we can have a little bit of a redemption for the Daytona 500. We certainly saw it last year with that spectacular 3-wide finish between Ryan Blaney, Daniel Suarez, and Kyle Busch. Did we get that again this year? Chances are no, let's be honest. However, Atlanta has been performing very well, so we'll just have to wait and see and tune in to Fox on Sunday. Speaking of Fox, I have a few thoughts about Fox. Their coverage is so frustrating as a fan. The camera shots are so zoomed in. You have a whole pack of 20 some odd cars. There's stuff happening in the back. There's moving and shaking and drivers trying to find their ways to the front or push lines. And yeah, we're just so zoomed in on the first 2 or 3 cars. And the commentary, they just seem to be stepping all over themselves. There's no cohesiveness. And the commercials, I mean, it felt like every 10 laps we were getting another commercial, and we would lose about 4 or so laps of green flag racing. And don't tell me that the side-by-side is good. Is it better? Yes. But let's be honest. Trying to watch this race in that tiny little screen while you've got Toyota and drug commercials blasting in your face, it makes it very difficult in order to keep your focus on the race. And I know that they need to pay their bills. I know that the media contract is how a lot of these teams can operate thanks to the charter agreement. But Fox is just behind the ball when it comes to their broadcasts. It's been one race, and I'm already looking forward to the changeover to the next carrier, which I believe is going to be Prime here in about 10 or 12 weeks. So we have what we have right now with Fox, but I really, really hope that next year they make some kind of change to shake up the talent in the booth. I think Kevin Harvick is good. Kevin Harvick is worth keeping around. I'm kind of over Clint Boyer. I don't feel like he's adding a ton of value to the booth. I think he's been out of the car now for too long to where he is a little disconnected from this car and doesn't quite understand it as well. Or maybe Fox is just making him kind of play up that shtick of being the goofball, the funny guy, trying to make him the new Darrell Waltrip. For me personally, it just doesn't stick. Mike Joy, a legend, a Hall of Fame, announcer and play-by-play. There just seems to be less energy. There's something missing. And I hope Fox can get it right, and I hope they can right the ship, and I hope that they can continue to put out the best possible broadcast to fans. But right now, in what we saw at the Daytona 500, that was not it. I hope IndyCar fans are optimistic for the upcoming media contract with Fox, where all of their races are going to be broadcast on Big Fox. I know the booth is going to be different than what we have at NASCAR. I imagine the broadcast director is going to be different than what we have in NASCAR. So I'll be very curious to see what those broadcasts are like for IndyCar, because they are getting one of the biggest races, if not the biggest race in the world, of the Indy 500 coming up in the end of May. So I hope they get it right for IndyCar's sake. I think IndyCar being healthy and being successful is important overall to motorsports in North America. NASCAR is still doing well and kind of climbing. And I hope that this new Fox deal and getting more eyes to IndyCar helps out IndyCar as well. So I'll be waiting with bated breath to see how Fox treats the broadcast for IndyCar. But for NASCAR, I think it definitely needs some help. So overall, I think that wraps up the Daytona 500 for 2025. Again, congratulations to William Byron winning his second Daytona 500 in a row. An impressive feat nonetheless. And we're going to be back at it at Atlanta Motor Speedway this weekend, Sunday, for more super speedway racing. Another great NASCAR weekend. And I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you are too. Till next time, my name's Cameron. This is the Fast Track Forum. We'll see you next time.